I always loved Cartoon Network as a kid. As I was growing up, it was one of my favorite channels to watch. Even today, it has some good shows like Adventure Time and Regular Show. One of the newest shows on the network, The Amazing World of Gumball, is a cute and mildly entertaining show. Not really my cup of tea, it's a little immature, but my brother seems to like it a lot. One day, I was watching Adult Swim when I'd realized that I'd been up so late that I hadn't even kept track of the time. It was already 4 a.m. I don't recall ever watching Adult Swim this late, so I stayed awake to see what would happen and when it ended. A little bumper showed up at the bottom of the screen during a commercial break. It said that a special episode of The Amazing World of Gumball was about to come on. I was a little confused of an episode of a very popular new show coming on this early, but I was bored and decided I would watch it, thinking it might come on later in the day so I could spoil it for my little brother. Sort of mean, I know. The flashy and energetic intro theme played, although it was played a little differently than I had recalled. The music was a little different, and the show's logo wasn't animated. Its colors were done rather sloppily as well, almost like something a little kid would do on a doodle board or a glow board. I ignored it, assuming that it was just done for this special episode. The title of the episode was The Grieving, sort of a sad title, but I didn't really pay too much attention to it. It began with Gumball, the show's 12-year-old protagonist, standing alone facing the corner of a dimly lit classroom. He looked absolutely miserable, a far cry from the cheerful demeanor he usually had. There was nobody else in the room, not even his best friend and adopted brother Darwin the goldfish, and the windows in the room clearly showed the night sky outside. I was really starting to get a little confused here. I mean, why would he be at school at night, and why was he standing in the corner all sad and alone? After what seemed like a minute of Gumball standing there somberly in the corner, the scene suddenly changed. We were in Gumball's house. Once again, the scene is silent and a little disquieting. Richard, Gumball's enormous rabbit father, walks in from the kitchen. He looks even more miserable than Gumball had in the previous scene. Richard isn't wearing his usual attire. He's dressed in a fancy black suit, which was a little uncharacteristic of him, and because he's usually a slob. He sighs and slumps down on the sofa, and starts sobbing intensely, sounding like someone who had just lost something important. I was starting to get a little creeped out by this. Where was the silly fun cartoon that I usually looked forward to watching with my little brother? This was something completely different. I was beginning to think that this might have been something the creators did as an experiment or something. A test of the animation or sound perhaps. Though it couldn't have been. Aside from the opening theme, which was still different from the final shows. The episode had been much quieter than it usually was. Only subtle sounds and very little music. And the animation wasn't anything to write home about either. It was done a bit like an amateur Flash on Newgrounds. The character designs were somewhat sloppy and rushed looking, and the real-life backgrounds used in the show looked extremely different. As confused and somewhat frightened as I was, for some reason I kept watching it. Poor Richard was still sobbing on the sofa, as the front door opened suddenly, making me jump a bit at such a loud noise. And Gumball's mother, Nicole, a blue cat just like him, stepped in. Like Richard, she wasn't wearing her usual outfit. For some reason, she was in a black dress and was wearing a nice little black hat to match. Nicole sat down on the couch to comfort her husband, although she was looking a little bit sad herself. By this point, Richard's crying had begun to get more pain and miserable sounding. This wasn't the normal cartoon crying in the show. This was realistic and almost depressing crying. Finally, after what seemed like hours, the sad scene at their home ended, and it shifted back to the school. We weren't in Gumball's classroom this time. We were in Principal Brown's office. Nicole and Richard were in there, in their usual clothes, looking more normal and happy than they had had before, but still slightly worried. Principal Brown, however, looked extremely upset. He quietly and somberly informed them that their children, Anais and Darwin, were not present after lunch earlier that day, and that they hadn't been seen in the rest of the day. Nicole was instantly furious at him and began shouting various calls and the like at him that I don't even think would have made it in a more mature program like Regular Show. I was actually laughing at this a bit, because it seemed kind of funny for Nicole to flip out in that manner and start swearing like a sailor in a G-rated cartoon. But my outlook soon changed when Principal Brown told her something else that had finally managed to calm her down. His eyes began to tear up as he informed them that they eventually were found, but that they had not been found alive. Principal Brown then went into graphic and nearly nauseating details, describing how their bodies were found, their parents sitting in utter shock. I could hardly believe what had happened. I mean, how the heck could such a cheery and fun kid show take such a dark and twisted turn? I was considering turning the television off, but I was too scared to be left in the dark by now, nearly frozen by fear and absolutely intently disturbed at the terrible things he was saying. Another flashback. The scene was earlier that day, and the animation in this scene was much worse than earlier. I don't remember it very clearly, but I think he began his recollection by saying that the school had called the police department when they had first turned up missing, believing that the kids had simply ran off and decided to skip school. They said that it was very uncharacteristic of both Darwin and Anais to go skipping school like delinquents. Darwin was a little naive and a little bit ditzy, but he was a good kid and wouldn't have even dreamed of doing something like that. And Anais was even less likely to run away. She was a straight-A student, despite being only 4, which also troubled the police, seeing as a defenseless 4-year-old little girl was missing as well as an older boy. The school had been thoroughly checked, so the police started to search the heavily wooded area outside of the school. It took little time for the police to discover the horrifying fate of Anais. In a small clearing outside of the school, Anais' head was found in a small box. You likely would have expected something like this to be shown in the show's cutesy art style, but it was nothing like that at all. Blood covered the box inside and out, and Anais' head was done in the normal style, but was drenched in blood and some other fluids, not all of them hers, apparently. There was a note at the box, seemingly written in her blood. It was never stated during the episode what exactly was written on the episode, was written on the note, but it apparently led to the rest of her remains and Darwin's heavily mutilated corpse. What I remembered most about the scene was how out of place it seemed. All the blood and gore from Darwin and Anais' slaughtered and dismembered remains were done in a very realistic and disturbing manner. It looked like the scene had been taken from a crime scene photograph done by a professional, not something from a cartoon. The way that the scene was animated was different than most of the other show as well. As you may know, the characters from the series are done in vastly different animation styles, from flash animation to CGI, and I think there's even one character done by someone putting their chin upside down to make a face. This particular scene wasn't anything that I had seen in the show before. Every little detail on Darwin's face was clearly illustrated. He looked a little like a zombie. His face was very pale, and his eyes had been gouged out by someone. Anais feared no better, or what was left of her anyway. She had been cut open, and her stomach had been slit open, and her intestines were strewn around the trees and bushes in the woods. Done once again in the very morbid and realistic style. I was beginning to feel very ill by the time this incredibly disturbing flashback had came to an end, so I quickly ran to the bathroom to vomit. I had felt better after upchucking, so I had realized that I had good timing and ran to the bathroom during a commercial. It was then that I noticed that the show had been running twice as long. It usually ran for about 11 minutes, but this episode was running for about 30. By then, I was wondering if there was any information on the Grieving on IMDb or something. So while the commercials were still playing, I looked up some information about the episode on Google. Nothing came up. No information remotely similar to the plot or name of the episode existed anywhere. Now incredibly freaked out, and wondering if anybody else was watching this, I quickly dialed up my brother Larry and asked him to turn on Cartoon Network and see if he was seeing the same things that I was. He was pretty upset that I had woken him up at this hour, but he's a nice guy and told me that he would see. I thanked him and stayed on the line as the show came back from commercial break. The scene had thankfully panned away from the horrific sight of the children and back to the principal's office. I asked Larry if he had saw some cartoon animals talking or crying, since that was what they were doing on my TV. To my surprise, he said that he saw nothing like that. Instead, the only thing he saw was a rerun of an old Looney Tunes short. In utter shock, I dropped the phone and ran to the TV to turn it off. As hard as I pressed the buttons, it would not shut off at all. I tried every single button, and none of them did a thing. I tried unplugging the whole thing as well, but nothing worked. The TV stayed on no matter what. Larry had hung up, assuming that I had played a joke or something. And I was home alone once again. My door was locked from the outside somehow, and the door to my bathroom was now locked as well, and it seemed like I had no choice but to call the police. Since my other family members were gone that night, it was the reason I could stay up so late to watch Adult Swim in the first place. When I hurriedly dialed my number, I accidentally dropped my cell phone in my cup of Pepsi. I was very scared, and I had no choice but to finish the episode. I turned on all the lights in my room and got under the covers, hiding like my little brother does when I make him watch scary movies with me. I had apparently missed a little bit, but Gumball's parents were still talking to Principal Brown, so not that much. Nicole was asking him if Gumball was alright. Apparently she hadn't remembered him when Principal Brown told her about what happened to both Darwin and Ananias. He looked slightly confused and shocked for a moment, and then explained to her that he thought Gumball was out sick today and that he had spent the day at home by himself with a stomach bug. Nicole screamed and wailed, while Richard quietly told him in a very out-of-character voice that they thought Gumball had gone on the bus this morning, but it didn't seem that way. The police were called once again, in search of the building in the small forest outside of Elmore Junior High. They had found him in Miss Simeon's classroom, hanging by a noose, with a blood-covered knife behind him and blood covering his clothing. The episode ended with a shot of Gumball's dead body hanging there in the corner, fading to black. The credits rolled silently, not in the usual Cartoon Network Cartoon Network annoyingly airs a promo that squishes half the screen. These credits rolled unusually slow, and they weren't that fun to watch either. A little creepy, just plain white text scrolling on a black background. I only recognized Ben Bouquet's name, as he was the creator of the show. The rest were people I had never heard of. The copyright notice at the end said Cartoon Network Studios 2001, which was incredibly odd seeing as the show was new for 2011. After all this was over, the screen then went to static for a split second, during which some incredibly disturbing and shocking video clips were shown between static intervals. I can still remember them all very clearly. The first was a picture of a person in a plague doctor outfit. Those always scared me for some reason, and the way the person in the suit was filmed was just as bad. A red light, something that freaked me out incredibly, was shown over the clip. The next was what seemed like a video being played very quickly, over and over, of a kitten's face being squished by a woman wearing high heels. Which was strange because a so-called friend of mine sent a picture yesterday of a cat being stepped on, similar to the kitten in the video. The last one was the one that disturbed me the most and made me want to both cry and vomit my guts out. It was my little brother, or at least a small child who looks very similar to him, being shot in the face by a person who looked like my father. You could clearly see the brain and blood splatter on the wall. I began to sob uncontrollably after that traumatizing clip, so much so that I had passed out. When I woke up, my door was unlocked, and my television was turned off. I went to call the police on the home phone in my kitchen to report that I had seen some very disturbing imagery on TV, and that my doors had been locked. When they arrived, they could find nothing that I had remembered early from that morning. I told my brother about the episode, and, well, he didn't really react too much. My internet history was even cleared, and they were angry at me and just assumed that I had a bad nightmare, when I was sure that I hadn't. It was a good thing I had recorded the episode. The officers were shocked at what I showed them. One of the officers also felt bad for me and took me out to a small diner so that I could recollect my thoughts. At the diner, I remembered that my family was out visiting my aunt, and they were supposed to be back by noon or so. It was already 11, and the officer and I drove back to find a whole squad of police cars and even some government agents at my house. They explained to me that my little brother was missing and that my mother and father were major suspects. I was freaking out, trying to tell them about the disturbing clip of the boy who looked like my brother being shot, but they wouldn't listen. I stayed with my older brother, Larry, who wouldn't believe me either, still insisting that all he saw was an old Looney Tunes cartoon, and nothing at all creepy or weird. The cops eventually told me that they would contact Turner Broadcasting and tell them about the incident. A representative at Turner Broadcasting came to my cousin and talked with me in a private about what I had seen and experienced that night. He was very kind, but it all seemed like some sort of front. After all I could tell him that I remembered, he agreed to play back the day's programming from which the incident when the disturbing Gumball episode had occurred. To my shock, all that it was airing at the time was an old Looney Tunes short. Nothing more, nothing less. I had told them all that what I had experienced and seen was real, but nobody listened. Eventually, I discovered that Ben had a Twitter account, so I sent a message of the episode, and this was the reply that I got. One thing. How the heck did you find that? I never, ever thought I would ever think about that old shame again. Don't tell anybody this, Sarah. But the amazing world of Gumball goes back further than you know. I used to have a really boring job as a teen, and I sketched little drawings of the Wattersons and friends. The episode you saw was never supposed to be seen by anybody but me and a few friends of mine. It was a very, very awful thing to do, but we made the episode as a joke. A guy from my old job, who everybody hated, had lost a child to a crazed serial killer, who is currently still out there somewhere. Anyway, we made it so we could make fun of the way he came into work, crying like a fool, which is why you saw Mr. and Mrs. Watterson cry so much in the episode. I know. I'm deeply sorry for what I did, which is why I tried to bury that stupid thing years ago. Literally, I went out in the countryside with my mates, we dug a hole, and we buried it. What I don't get, though, is how you describe the blood and guts and stuff. We didn't have any scene with Darwin and Ice's bodies being found. All that happens in the episode is the parents being informed of the kids being found dead and them crying like crazy. We didn't even draw anything in the episode like that at all. We're not that sick. Now, this is my theory. The lunatic who killed the man's child found the tape we buried, watched it, and heavily edited it. Then he hijacked the local TV station, where in your specific city, somehow, and got the episode to air on your local Cartoon Network station. Now, why your brother couldn't see it, I have no idea. Why it seems like you were the only one who saw it, I have no idea either. I'm sorry, but I just don't know. Now, for the explanation you've been waiting for. The clips at the end. I don't know. I don't know. I'm deeply sorry from the bottom of my heart, but I have no idea why those clips were aired. I just don't. I'm sorry, I really am, but me and my mates were just the ones who made those scenes with Richard and Nicole crying. That's it. I'm so sorry, Sarah. I'm so deeply sorry. Best wishes. Ben B. and everyone involved with the grieving. Seriously, stay away from that episode. And that, my little shadows, was the amazing world of Gumball, The Grieving. An amazing world of Gumball lost episode Creepypasta. And honestly, it's about time I sat there and actually narrated this entire thing again. Well, more or less gave this a review, because the last time I touched up on the story was during the short film that I did last year. And for anybody wondering, yes, I made a short film for this entire the entire creepypasta and everything, which I honestly found extremely enjoyable to make and things like that, but we're not going to get into that. Now, normally I would get into whatever it is that I'm about to get in with the review, but I think it's only necessary that we get into the main comments of the story and read up on, well, as many of them as we can possibly get. I have a feeling that we're going to get a definite mixed bag of certain things with this creepypasta. So let's honestly see what in the world we can find. Lost episode recreation. You can find the video I made to YouTube. Use this in. Okay, never mind. I made the recreation of the episode. Alright, this is the favorite pasta on the wiki. Um, Another one says this is fake. Of course it is. Now stop complaining. The Grieving is fake. Basically, a lot of people pretty much saying that this is fake. But yeah, it's basically there's like a couple of other things as well. There's like a lot of and a bunch of other kind of things like that. You know, basically, I mean, yeah. Another one says the wiki's too vandalized. Understandable. They have there's a horrible lot of things with that. Yeah, it's there's literally a lot of different comments, and given the fact that there's literally over 300 of them, I'm not going to really read a whole lot of these. I thought I was, but there's really nothing else more. But yeah. There's really not much I can say about the comment section in this creepypasta, so I'm just going to go on ahead and actually more or less give my final thoughts with this creepypasta. Now, to start off, the very beginning of this creepypasta was actually a really good hook. I'm going to be honest. The mentioning of I always loved Cartoon Network as a kid, and growing up it was my favorite show, my favorite channel to watch. And basically all those other things as well that, well, basically introduces the protagonist and things like that, and, you know, what they like and ultimately what they thought about, you know, the actual show itself, before immediately getting into the main meat of the story. Now, overall, it's not really that bad, to be honest, but I kind of wish that there was a little bit more of a better explanation, you know, in the very beginning, that kind of helped explain everything, I guess. But overall, it's a pretty darn good startup. Now, as for the main meat of the story itself, basically with the protagonist Sarah watching Adult Swim late at night, and then watching it at 4 a.m. Now, this is the thing, and some of you may completely disagree with me with what I have to say, and of course that's fine. But this creepypasta, really reading it again and actually really giving it the time, you know, specifically giving the opportunity and time to really see what this entire creepypasta is honestly really about. This creepypasta was actually kind of cliched. And I know, people are going to go after me just for saying that. I'm not saying that the creepypasta is bad in no form or in any way, but it's extremely cliched in a lot of different, well, ways. Wow, that rhymed. I mean, we have the crying, we have the blood, we have the gore. We literally have, you know, Nicole and Richard crying realistically, quote unquote. I don't think I even need to make a mention of why I think that's a huge problem with creepypastas. But, I mean, I don't really know when exactly this creepypasta was actually first made. So, depending on the date that this was actually created, I think I'm willing to give it a bit of a pass on the matter of the cliche thing, because it's very likely that this is a very old story. I mean, judging by it, this was very likely made in 2011. So, for that sake, I'm going to go ahead and give a bit of a pass, which is normally something I don't do when it comes to these creepypastas. But I'm willing to give a bit of a pass when it comes to the actual cliched concept of the storyline itself. However, with that said, I still have some issues with the story that do need to be greatly addressed. Now, the main concept of the episode itself is overall pretty fair. There actually is a relatively decent plot within the actual storyline itself, specifically with, you know, Gumball and with Gumball's parents ultimately Well, actually, this is kind of what it really is. It's a mix mash of scenes. And I actually did write a separate creepypasta about, the aftermath, pretty much trying to explain the whole thing, but I think I'm going to go ahead and make a mention of this now. The actual story itself is completely and utterly mishmashed. There's a lot of things within the story that are obviously edited in a lot of different kind of ways that kind of take away more or less from the structure of the story. But I think that was likely done on purpose as a way of trying to be a little bit confusing, or as a way for the protagonist, well, the author of the story, to kind of more or less have people try and figure it out on their own, which I will be making a mention of later on in this review. Now, the storyline itself is actually, again, like I said, relatively decent. With Gumball, with everything going along the lines and the crazy things with Nicole and Richard and basically all that insanity going on with Principal Brown and other people like such. And, it's pretty messed up, to be completely and utterly honest. And, it's actually kind of surprising for the most part, because this creepypasta was so popular, and it still is so popular, that even the show itself, literally, The Amazing World of Gumball, the actual show, the creators put an entire thing, a little teaser thing, to the Grieving in one of their episodes. I am not kidding any of you when I say that. Literally, they actually did that. This story was about as popular as it was. And I'm not going to deny it certainly deserves it. I mean, it's a well-made creepypasta, to be honest. Grammar-wise, definitely. I mean, sure enough, it's cliched in some ways, and I do have my own personal issues with this, but I gotta give extreme credit where credit is due. This really had a lot going for it. And the fact that even the creators of The Amazing World of Gumball mention this creepypasta in their own show is genius when you think about it. And it's actually really funny too, because a lot of people have actually asked Ben about the existence of this episode, and obviously he says, no, this doesn't exist, it's a fake story, and that's a full-on fact. But you actually did something pretty well when, whenever you actually sat there and created something so amazing and so crazy that you wind up asking even the creator of the show itself whether or not if it's real or not. And you know how I said about me having some issues with the cliches? Well, really thinking back on it and everything, like I said, I'm still willing to give it that pass. I mean, if Squidward's sewer side could do that, then I think this one can actually do it fine as well. But continuing on with the review itself, it is relatively terrifying to say the least. I mean, even though it's cliched by our standards nowadays, it's still genuinely creepy when you think about it. I mean, imagine that. Like, imagine seeing that kind of thing on television. I mean, with, like, your favorite characters being completely disemboweled and attacked and things like that. Like, right then and there, in front of you, on a cartoon. Well, on TV. Likely chances you would probably have extremely messy pants after watching that. I mean, I remember the first time I actually read this creepypasta, and let me tell you, it was pretty freaky. I'm not gonna lie, it scared me a bit. Maybe not as much as Squidward's sewer side, but definitely enough to freak me out on this one. But another thing I can actually say that I genuinely love about the creepypasta itself is the fact that the protagonist makes a couple of mentions of of a couple of parts about the actual show itself, specifically with explaining the whole realistic blood situation and actually giving a good explanation about the whole thing in question, about even going so far to make a mention of the varying different animation styles that the Amazing World of Gumball uses. And in retrospect, I actually think that that's a good explanation. It really is. And it actually plays out and gives a good excuse for why exactly there's realistic blood, even though I know I didn't make a mention of it in the narration, and I apologize for missing that part. I don't know, well, actually no, I purposely kind of got that out, but that was for my own reasons. But ultimately, with everything kind of going around, and going into good explanations and comparing and actually giving examples of the show is a very huge positive with this creepypasta, because it not only helps out with the believability of the story itself, but also kind of helps freak the reader out a little bit more, because you're actually visualizing it. And that's another thing I can give a genuine positive for, is that the visualizations in this creepypasta and the descriptions, my goodness, it's amazing. I mean, flat out amazing. The effort that was put in to describe every little detail, to the point where, I mean, I'm probably going to get nightmares just from reading this, is amazing, is incredible. Is very much incredible, which is probably the reason why it became so popular as it did. I mean, the love and the effort that's put into this creepypasta is just amazing. I mean, it shows the love that was put into it. And again, this is a really great thing. It genuinely is. Now, with that said, there are a couple of problems I do have with the story that, personally, on my end, I don't think was even acceptable even beforehand. And this is exactly to the point where the protagonist proceeds to try and dial up somebody else, but ultimately they wind up dropping their phone in a thing of Pepsi. Okay then. I mean, that's kind of random, but then again, it was the early 2000s, but actually no, it was like the mid 2000s, I don't know. But still, this creepypasta, nonetheless, was actually pretty good for the most part. But wow, I can't believe I just blurted that out. I mean, not that I don't mean it. It's just it took away. It kind of went completely off topic with the actual creepypasta, and I'm gonna be getting to the whole thing in regards to that. I'm getting back to my review. I apologize for that, people. I had a bit of a brain fart with that, but the main issue I can say right now that I had was specifically with the attempts. With the attempts to sit there and... this is like later on in the actual story itself, but along the lines of the fact that, all these messed up kind of things that were going on. But specifically what the issue is specifically in the story where the protagonist attempts to try and turn off the TV, but is not able to, using the remote, and even unplugging the television. You have to have an element of realism there. No, when I mean that, I mean that's not realistic. That kind of thing does not happen. If there's no power going to the television, then guess what? There's no power going to the television. The entire episode would have immediately cut off and been turned off entirely if the protagonist actually sat there and did that. I mean, it's... yeah. I mean, that's basically what ultimately happened. And another issue, too, I have with the story is the mentioning of, like, all the doors being locked by some unseen force. I mean, I know it doesn't specifically say that, but it does say that the entire thing was completely... the entire show, or... wow, I'm saying show. It really goes to show how broken my brain is right now today, people. But the whole thing about... all the doors and everything getting locked. I mean, really? Like, all the doors getting locked at complete random. Or just automatically being locked for the sake of just being locked. I mean, the biggest question I have is, what exactly, happened? Now, I have a theory in regards that could possibly save and give a good reasoning for the whole thing. Like how the creepypasta says, the protagonist wind up fainting after a while, after the disturbing images and everything that kind of played on. So, what it was likely that happened was, before all that happened, the protagonist probably wind up passing out from fear or something like that went on, and all the events with all the TV not turning off properly or things like that, and all that crazy stuff, was just... I don't know, like a visualization or something, or a crazy wicked dream or whatever that was going on. But then again, I kind of expect this theory not to have a whole lot of leverage because, I mean, it didn't exactly happen too far. You know, I don't know. I don't know, people. I'm trying to come up with some good explanation to excuse it, but there is no excuse. There's really not much of an excuse for having those kind of bad turnouts, more or less. And of course, another issue I have, but this is likely because of the fact that somebody may have edited it, but this is the thing. If the protagonist recorded the episode, then why in the world did he not sit there and show it to his brother? Why did he not show it to the other police officers? Or, then again, if the police actually wind up seeing it, why did they not vouch for him whenever they sat there and whenever the other crazy people wind up coming in? I mean, granted, this is probably just an edit that some idiot probably wind up doing, but overall, why in the world would you ever put that? It's a complete and utter plot hole and a leap of, well, I wouldn't say a leap of logic, but it's like you just had the recording. You showed the recording to all the other officers. Yet at the same time, you can't sit there and show an entire squad about the whole episode, even though it's on your television. I mean, and apparently, even like the mention, and there was another part in the story where he mentioned that, where the protagonist mentioned that she showed that to her brother and he supposedly fainted, which in retrospect does not play out because, you know, even then, afterwards, you know, the protagonist's brother says that, you know, they saw nothing. So it's very likely that that was probably an edit that was put in that had not been corrected. But it really does bring the story down, but I'm not even going to count it, because again, it's very likely that that was simply an edit that somebody made that wasn't caught in time, and cannot be edited out no more. So, yeah, there's that. But I think, though, that the best part about this creepypasta is the ending with the email. The email from Ben himself, specifically, you know, admitting the whole thing about what was going on, you know, what the origins of the actual episode itself, although the part of it, and the possibilities and theories about what exactly happened with the tape, and, you know, what exactly happened in regards to, well, even though it's really not even made a mention, about what exactly happened. It could have caused the whole thing to go crazy as it did. You know, overall though, it definitely deserves the popularity that it does, and it's still a really good creepypasta. However, the unrealistic parts in the story with the person unplugging the things, the cliches, actually nope, scratch that. The mentioning of the episode being recorded, but yet nobody else seeing it afterwards, unless it was deleted, and no proper explanation for that. And, well, specifically those major two big plot issues I have, there's really not anything else that I can say that's negative about the story. I mean, other than what I just mentioned. I mean, it's genuinely a very good creepypasta. I mean, the cliches could definitely be, you know, we could definitely be without the cliches, but this was made in the earliest times where creepypastas were still being made, so I'm willing to give it an excuse on that manner. But, like what I always say with these stories, this is simply my own personal opinion, and if you disagree with it, that's perfectly fine too. We're all entitled to our own opinions in regards to these creepypastas, and this is simply my own personal thoughts. My final rating of this creepypasta would have to be a 8 out of 10. It's a really well, decently made creepypasta, pretty freaky, very beautifully done on the imagery, the grammar, the sentence structuring, and the paragraphs, and the paragraph structuring as well, and the whole thing does, to a small extent, seem actually kind of believable. However, the cliches, sorry about that. However, the main problems with the with their supposedly being recording but nobody else seeing it, and, you know, the whole thing in regards to, you know, basically a lot of other things that I'm probably not able to mention right now because I can't really think of anything. But if you guys can point out any extra kind of flaws or positives that this story might have, I certainly would love to hear your thoughts on it. And of course, with that said, what did you guys think about this creepypasta? Did you guys enjoy it? Did you guys not? Do you also believe that this deserved the hype that it's deserved, or do you not think so? And what would you have personally done to help make the story a lot better? Let me know your thoughts down in the comments section below. I'm the Shadow Reader. Thanks again for watching today's episode. And if you're brand new here to this channel, make sure to like, comment, and subscribe because I make brand new videos every single day. And of course, like always, roll the outro because I'm out.
In fear and surprise as your eyes widen, your mouth goes dry with each battered breath. You try to scream, your mind begs to leave, glued to your computer screen. The killers they slash, the tapes burn and crash. The cartridge you bought will be your final haunt. The rituals of hate will seal your fate. The tears you shed will be from the fear-gripping, horror-driven, nightmarish, gore-filled, terrorizing, hateful, burning, violent, rage-inducing, knife-slashing, blood-splattering, silent screams. Only time will tell if you will escape this online hell. Your horror-filled obsessions will come with its own regressions. Your pathetic screams will not be heeded in any way, because your nightmares will come at any day.